Thank you, Denise. And thank you to our legislators for being here today. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our esteemed legislative panel. Today, we are privileged to have an exceptional group of state lawmakers gathered here, ready to discuss the remarkable opportunities we have before us in finally passing climate legislation in Lansing. My name is Hudson Villenueve, and I proudly represent the Michigan League of Conservation Voters. Our organization is dedicated to electing and supporting climate champions like the esteemed individuals on this panel. As we set the stage for this enlightening conversation, I want to state that our primary objective is to gain insight into the Michigan Legislature's plans for achieving the goals outlined in the My Healthy Climate Plan and in the Senate's newly introduced Clean Energy Future Plan. We will explore topics like environmental justice and how we can remedy the harms of the past and the present. We will aim to explore how Michigan will achieve a 100% clean energy economy that will lead us towards a cleaner, prosperous, and more equitable future. We will talk about false solutions to the climate crisis, and as Denise said, we will have an opportunity to hear from you, the audience, on what you would like to ask these representatives. The legislative proposals before us hold great promise. Among them, there is a Senate bill aimed at reaching the significant milestone of 60% clean renewable energy by 2030 and 100% by 2035. There is legislation to remove the cap on distributed generation and promote community solar. Yeah, let's give a round of applause for that. Another important bill will empower the Michigan Public Service Commission to consider the climate crisis when dealing with our investor-owned utilities, and there are energy efficiency requirements that'll improve our homes, save us money, all while cleaning up our land, air, and water. Before we delve into the specifics, let us first take a moment to introduce our panelists. With us today is State Representative Dylan Wegela of Garden City, Michigan. State Senator Rosemary Bayer of West Bloomfield. And State Senator Sue Shink of Northfield Township. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll have each panelist introduce themselves and start with the question of why addressing the climate crisis is of the utmost importance to them and their constituents, starting with Dylan.
Hi, everybody. Can everybody hear me? Yeah. Okay. So my name's Dylan. I'll tell you, I'm new. This is my first term in office. My background, I spent the last 7.5 years as a high school and middle school educator. I grew up in Michigan, but I've spent some time teaching in different parts. I taught in South Korea for 6 months, and I taught in Arizona for 5 years. And in Arizona is really where I started my political career. You might remember teachers went on strike out there in 2018. I was one of the organizers of that strike. We got 50,000 teachers to go on strike, and we won $400 million from a Republican trifecta for schools. When I moved back to Michigan, I decided to run for office because I believe at a fundamental level we need organizers in office, people who will support the work of organizers, and this kind of connects to the reason why I'm here today is, we are running out of time to do something on the climate. I think everyone in this room knows that, but we can always say that fight needs to happen tomorrow or the next time and the next time. But the reality is the only time that we have to do this is now, and we need to continue to do this. So that's why I'm here to just share what we have going on, some of the things I will fight for, and hopefully that the House will fight for, and listen to all of you.
Senator Bayer.
Thank you. My name is Rosemary Bayer. I am just in the beginning of my second term as a Michigan State Senator. Before that, I was a computer engineer and eventually a business owner. Kind of a different sort of work to go from being an engineer to being a legislator. But I went to Lansing to try to solve some of the big problems, and I think engineers we just like that stuff. And when I ran for office the first time, I was very focused on water and on clean water. And it turned out everyone that I talked to as I knocked on doors was also really worried about the clean water. And so that became a huge part of my first 4 years in office, and we have actually made some progress. We have a lot of work to do still, but we've invested a lot of money from the state perspective. We've managed to scrape a lot of money out of the federal government, and we will continue those efforts and continue moving forward, protecting the water here, of all places. Now we're really focused on affordability and other parts of our water systems, the infrastructure, all of those things. Lots of work going on, and I feel really pleased and proud of all of us in Lansing that we managed to be moving that cause forward. Now, of course, there are many other things we need to do, and we really need to start to focus harder, and luckily our governor proposed a healthy climate plan, and so that sort of helps people understand that there's a lot that we need to take on when it comes to energy. And so why are we doing this? There's that famous quote, right? If not now, when? And if not us, who? We absolutely must collectively do this work and bring our state forward, clean air, clean water, clean energy, all of it. And that's why I'm here. Thank you.
Good morning. I represent Washtenaw counties and Jackson County, and it's when you say, like, why is it important to do this now? Almost 30 years ago, I was a student at the University of Michigan studying sustainability at the School of Natural, what was the School of Natural Resources at the time, and people would say, well, you're the generation that's going to do it. And I think in so many ways we've come very far technically since that time, but politically we have not. I mean, we've been under Republican rule basically that whole time, and the changes that needed to be made to prevent climate change haven't happened. And I worked really hard on a personal level to live a sustainable life, organic farming, trying to make sure that our personal choices were sustainable. But the problem is that our society creates these systemic situations that we can't avoid. So it doesn't really matter how much I do or you do if the rest of society is not coming along with us. And for the last 4 years, I was a Washtenaw County Commissioner and worked very hard with Representative Jason Morgan to get our climate action plan going, and I'll just give a shout out to Matt Nod right now because he's working on it. And we found, again, it didn't matter how much Washtenaw County wants to do it. We're in a situation where, because the bulk of the power generation that serves Washtenaw County is unsustainable power, dirty power, Washtenaw County was going to have a super bionic lift that we wouldn't be able to do alone. And so there are a lot of things that can be done without the cooperation of the power companies, like weatherization, which they actually do cooperate with, but and do quite a bit of good work there. But without changing the nature of the power supply, we weren't going to be able to make it. And so that'll play in a little. That I'm the one who introduced the bill to broaden the purview of the MPSC. But why is it important? You all know why it's important. There are farmers in my district who are facing unstable weather patterns. It's too wet at the wrong time. It's too dry at the wrong time. It's too cold at the wrong time. It's too hot at the wrong time, right? So it's just like the weather's becoming chaotic. There are businesses that are struggling. There are people who are struggling. And then to top that off, there are people in my district that have holes in their roofs and are using plastic to cover their windows because they have been systemically left out of economic development, beginning with redlining back in the 60s, and they don't have the money to keep up their homes, and they don't have the money to pay for the power to keep their homes going. And even with that situation, there's a power company, they're making huge profits. The people who work there are paid well, but the people who must buy that power can't afford it. So when we're working on these issues, we're not just looking at climate change, we're also looking at these recommendations that we're making, that they're going to make our homes and businesses more comfortable, reduce energy costs, and improve the reliability of the energy delivery. So we're looking at how do we make it win for everybody. Equity was a huge part of developing the My Healthy Climate Action Plan, and equity is going to be a huge part of all of these bills that we're putting through. And so we'll talk more about them, but I just wanted to put that out there because I think it's really important, because for so many years, environmentalism was looked at as something for rich white folks, and you know, it doesn't have to be, and the way we're doing it in Michigan now, it's not.
Thank you to our panelists. Turning back towards our senators, I want to talk about that Clean Energy Future Plan that is so groundbreaking. And I know it's just getting started and there's more pieces on the way, but what is the Clean Energy Future Plan and what are some of the exciting opportunities in it for Michigan?
Well, thank you. It's really exciting. With Sam Singh, I've been leading this, but we're definitely not alone in it. It's a team effort, and I want to give a great shout out to the Democratic Senate Caucus. It's just full of a bunch of people trying to do their best to serve this state. So these bills are 11. Cleaning the electrical grid. So phasing out of coal-fired electricity generating plants by 2030. Oh, sorry, that's Senator Bayer's. So I was going to let her talk about her. Do you want to talk about it?
No, I got it.
Okay. A clean fuel standard to reduce the carbon intensity of transportation fuels by 25% by the end of 2035. To repair and decarbonize homes and businesses, so to have a net zero building code also, to develop that. Energy waste reduction, so to reduce the amount of energy waste that power plants are creating, and so then we won't need to produce quite so much. Making it easier for farmers enrolled in the PA 116 program to rent out their land for solar power and keep their participation in PA 116, which is financially important to a lot of them. And then expand the purview of the Michigan Public Service Commission. And I think this one, they're all transformative and they're all going to be working together. Right now, the Public Service Commission, which is the primary method of regulating the utilities, can't consider the effect on climate change of the power companies' power generation when they're making decisions about how much power, how power is generated, what costs the power companies can pass on. And this bill also includes reliability, health equity, affordability, in addition to the other things that the MPSC has been allowed to consider, which has mostly been about quantity and grid capacity. And then, well, that's it for now. So all those bills come out of the My Healthy Climate Action Plan.
Senator Bayer, would you like to add anything about the Clean Energy Future Plan?
Sure. Yeah, there's a number of other maybe more technical components as we work out the set of bills needed to actually enact the whole plan. Very specific things about the grid, for example. We think of the electrical grid. It's managed by an organization that's directed to the federal government called MISO. So as we move toward replacing old dirty energy with new renewable clean energy, we have to be able to get it onto a grid of some sort so it gets to people's houses, right? Gets to your charging stations, get out to everyone. Right now, there's like a 5 to 7 year wait for any new generation of electricity to get onto that grid. So we can't, even though we have new suppliers coming into town all the time right now, they have a long wait, and it's an expensive long wait just to be able to join and produce energy and start to be a part of the system. So there's a couple of things. One is to change the way that works, right? Kind of start to build up access to the grid. the current grid. The second piece is to build a redundancy into the grid. So that does multiple things. One, it goes faster, right? It's new. We don't have to wait for all the testing to make sure it fits on the grid. It's going to go right onto the grid. Secondly, it's resilience, right? One of the biggest issues we have in Michigan, we have the lowest reliability for our energy source in the country. The lowest. So if we have an alternative path, we have both. We continue to try to improve the older existing infrastructure while we add new infrastructure. We have resilience because we have multiple sources now. We have multiple grids getting there. We have multiple sources or generators of electricity. And that includes storage, by the way. It's 5 to 7 years just to put storage onto the grid. And as you all probably know, I'm sure you do, clean energy these days, right? Solar and wind, and those sources need to be stored somewhere. So we're not just burning gas whenever we need more energy when we turn it up. We literally turn up the gas, right? Can't turn up the wind. So we need storage everywhere, 5 to 7 years for new storage sites to get onto the existing grid. So the grid infrastructure is a huge piece of our work all over the place. And then all the local rules. So right now, if you live in have a homeowners association, you probably aren't allowed to put solar on your roof. So there's a bill already, not introduced, drafted, to do that. So there's a lot of local issues about it. We tend to be local control in this state. And the local communities right now, I'll tell you what, they think windmills and solar panels are ugly. I think they're graceful and beautiful, and I love seeing solar panels everywhere. So part of our, yes, part of our collective mission, all of you need to help with this. In your communities, we have got to start shifting the feeling of clean energy. You want this in your town. You want this in your neighborhood. You want this on your house. You want your local community to have their own little electric company, their own generation of clean energy that they provide you on an alternate grid. Also could use the old one, right? Sometimes we sell electricity back to old companies. That's good. No, we do that. No more metering on that. No more caps on that. So all those things. But right now, there's such a resistance to it. I mean, that's got to be one of our biggest projects. Large numbers of people need to start driving this forward, and legislators can't really do that. We need you guys to do that. So I just wanted to give you an assignment, and that's all.
Thank you, Senators. In those remarks, I heard a lot of different bills from the local to the state level, and what I got out of it is that this is a whole of government approach from the individual all the way up to the state government, even the federal government. Representative Wegela, what is the House working on in terms of addressing the climate crisis? Is there a plan on the level of the Clean Energy Future Plan, and what is your office working on?
Yeah, so in the House, we have yet to introduce mirroring legislation to the Senate. I know that our Speaker Pro Tem, Lori Potsky, is working on that with stakeholder groups, so we're really excited to see what comes out of those discussions. But I think, I might take this in kind of a different way. So not speaking for the entire House here, just speaking as an individual who deeply cares about this, I think something we need to consider as we transition to renewable energy and clean energy across the state of Michigan is thinking about our electric grid. When you think about this, raise your hand in here if you think that having electricity in your home is a human right at this point. It should be a human right, in my opinion. And I bring this up because when we talk about moving to clean energy and electric vehicles, we are relying right now on an unreliable investor-owned utility company. I believe that utilities in Michigan should be publicly owned. And at the very bare minimum, we should be holding accountable these organizations that make profit off of things that we need to survive. And I know the House is going to be doing listening tours around the state, investigating what communities feel about in investor-owned utilities, and I encourage you to go out and let them know how you feel. This being said, I have House Joint Resolution Y, which was a bill that Yusuf Rabi introduced last term to put on the ballot to have have public-owned utilities. That being said, I'm not naive. That is a fight that's going to take a lot of time, but I believe it is a worthy fight. Another thing I just will touch on real quick is when we talk about clean energy, we need to make sure that through this transition, we are not just contributing to further wealth inequality in our state. Right now in the United States, we have 3 people who have more than 50% of the wealth of our country. 3 people have more wealth than 160 million Americans. So how can we make this transition without making wealth inequality worse, right? I was a history teacher. I think about the Industrial Revolution and the robber barons that came forward in the Gilded Age. How do we make sure that we don't see that same problem as we transition to clean energy? I think that's something we still need to talk about, but if we're not doing that and we're not thinking about those things, we are going to see some major problems in our communities as we make this transition.
Give it up. As we know, the key to addressing climate change is stopping the root cause, which is burning fossil fuels, which is crazy to say because some folks won't admit that yet still. But as we transition, as Dylan alluded to, questions like which communities are going to see the benefits of these new investments, what happens to the workers in the fossil fuel economy as we transition, historically disadvantaged and BIPOC communities we know have borne the brunt of fossil fuel production, what happens to them in this clean energy transition? For the next question for the whole panel, I want the panel to address what does a just transition mean to you, and how is the state legislature going to ensure we do not leave communities behind?
All right, I'll start. In the My Healthy Climate Plan, there's a commitment to a just transition. And there's a commitment to also spending a certain percentage, I could be wrong, I think it's about 40%, to make sure that it directly goes to historically underinvested communities. And so there are a couple bills that are going through the Senate right now. One that my office has worked on to cap the energy costs of lower income families at 6%. And for many families, it's well over 30%. So to do that, to cap the cost of water, but we're also declaring that water is a human right. And again, that's Senator Baer. There are investments in weatherization, hundreds of millions of dollars going to weatherization over the next year or two. And that is for families who are struggling. And then additional monies to make sure, because there are all kinds of rules around, which is something that is always shocking to me when I find out. There are all kinds of rules that protect the poorest people from getting the money that is needed to fix up those homes. So we're changing that so that there's plenty of money to make sure that anybody who has a home that's in serious need of repair, like the holes in the roof, that they get that money and then they qualify for more money for weatherization costs. And so those are some of the things. Senator Chang has a bill to make sure that the people who are experiencing environmental injustices are getting the money from fines that are levied on those companies that are polluting illegally, and that at least some of that money goes back to those communities to help them fight. And right now, or to help them improve things. Right now, that's not how it is. If a company is fined for polluting a community, that money goes back to the government, but it doesn't go back specifically to fight pollution or to make up for its effects. So those are a few of the things. I think in terms of workers, there's been a lot of money put into programs to get people back to school for retraining. There's a commitment that people whose jobs shift because of this transition will have the resources that they need to get another job that is a fulfilling, valuable job, or career, so that it truly is a just transition. I think there's a whole bunch more. I think one of the things that becomes a struggle for me when I'm talking about is we're doing a lot of things that may seem a bit piecemeal. but they're all under an organizing umbrella. That it should be just, it should be equitable. They're developed with a broad array of stakeholders to make sure that we're hearing from the voices of the people who are most affected. That it should help people build wealth and a future here in Michigan, so that people want to stay in Michigan, people want to come in Michigan, and there's a place for everybody and people aren't being displaced. In the past, I think that those are not things that have been considered when policies have been developed, but they're absolutely being considered and they're forefront now.
Thank you, Senator. Before we move on, I want to introduce State Representative Abraham Aiyash of Hamtramck. I'm sure he got stuck in the traffic. If we had some high-speed trains, he might have been here on time.
Yes.
State Representative, you can introduce yourself and why fighting climate change is important to you, briefly.
So good morning, everybody. I just came back from Mackinac Policy Conference, and guess what was not talked about on the conference? Ironically, we had the hottest conference in the last 20 years, and no one thought to ask where we're at and where we're going as a state and as a country. But look, I'm sure Sue and Rosemary and Dylan have already said it. We're not running out of time. We are out of time. And it is scary to me that in every single conversation we have around growing our economy, around making sure Michigan is a welcoming place to live, around making sure that we have the affordable assets for folks to come into this state to call it home, we never talk about the perils of the planet that are going to happen and are happening when we're not being considerate of those things. And the uncomfortable conversation is always, somebody's going to make less money in the process. And no one wants to be honest about that part of the conversation. The status quo and those that are making profits right now are going to get an uncomfortable shift in this necessary step to protect our planet. And anybody that tries to tell you otherwise is just not being honest there. Now, I'm not saying people go broke and companies go bankrupt, but there has to be a transition, and we got to make sure that we first prioritize the kitchen table, not the shareholder table. And we're in a unique moment, particularly in Michigan, because our Secretary of Energy is the former Michigan governor, and she is begging us to reform our laws so she can start pouring all those billions of dollars from the IRA and the IJA for us to finally do something about it. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I'm a tree hugger through and through, and I'm looking forward to the discussion with my incredible colleagues from the House and Senate.
Thank you, Representative. We were just answering the question, what does a just transition mean to you? And I'll let Senator Bayer continue that discussion.
Thank you. I really want to talk to you a little bit about the screening, but first I have to say something. That was a great introduction. I want to tell you a very small story about DTE. How many people have DTE as their energy provider? Oh, a few. So we had a hearing. Senator Shink and I are on the policy and the budget committees. I think you're on both. Yes, we're both on both of those. And so they were presenting to us after the last big storm, the last big destructive storm that we were trying to survive. And they were so proud to get up and say, DTE executives, in fact, the president of the company got up and said, we spent $120 million last year on tree trimming, yay us. Because tree trimming does cause most of the actual outages for sure. And so as he's talking, I'm looking on my phone and I said, that's great, so proud of you. How about the $1.1 billion in profit you made last year? So we are actually writing legislation for the Public Service Commission to actually create a formula that ties profits to how much they spend to just keep the goddamn thing running. Irresistible. So one of the things we're going to do, the transition to environmental justice in our state, there's a lot of things to do, and much of the work in the plan is driven toward that. There's a tool called EJ Screen, Environmental Justice Screen, that the EPA uses, that is provided to all of us. In Michigan, one of the things we don't have is a very good way to assess the impact on the environment for projects. So when someone wants to build a new plant, say in a nice little town out in the beautiful green part of the state, there's no real good way for them to say, yeah, they have to actually do an environmental impact assessment, but it could just say, we did an assessment and it was fine. And that counts as an environment. And honestly, that passes the test for doing an environmental impact. We don't even know what they did, what that means. So we're building a new assessment, but part of it is including that EJ Screen tool to take a look at what's actually happening already. What are the things that can't happen here anymore in this community? What are the things we need to do to fix it first? It's a real challenge for us because we have so much brownfield everywhere in the state. We're trying to push new businesses into brownfield spaces that are already ruined, but that's usually in a place where there's some pretty severe environmental justice issues. So trying to balance those two things, take care of that community, rebuild those sites as much as possible. We still have the old Superfund sites from way back when that we still are trying to make sure we maintain and keep away from people. And those communities, the ones that need the most help, that we're doing affordable energy and affordable water and the things that we owe to the community for the position that we put them in. So using those screening tools for every single project will become a mandate for every single thing we do, with an entirely new environmental impact assessment that actually means something that you have to pass before you can do any work. So we're working on it. We got a lot of good stuff in that specific arena, and I think ultimately we've got a new sheriff in town, and actually time to start focusing all of our work on the people, not the profits. So.
So I think this is maybe, if not the most important question, one of the most important questions is, how do we make sure that we are doing this the right way and making sure that it's just for communities? So I think you have to look at hard numbers, in my opinion. You have to make sure that a high percentage of the investment dollars are going into our low-income communities. Federally, we're looking at the Justice 40 plan as well as at the state level to make sure that 40% of I think the way it's worded is the benefits of this transition are going to these communities. Maybe a greater discussion on like actual 40% of dollars should go to these communities. That being said, though, we have to look at the wages of the workers who work in these facilities. The UAW has recently been talking about a just transition with the big three as they move to the EVs, and they've been comparing salaries of employees at current factories compared to some of the new factories that are being opened up in different states across the country, and they're at rates that are half the wages of the factories that are already in order. So we need, I think, collectively, and this is something that's not necessarily just on us as the legislature, but it says a society is supporting workers in their unionization efforts of these facilities so that they can bargain for fair wages and contracts from the big three. And this year, when the big three inevitably and hopefully goes on strike to fight for better wages, all of us in this room will stand in solidarity with them, as we hope they will with us when we are fighting for these environmental concerns, because it's not separate, right? And I think this is the thing that, if I can echo anything, is these movements for justice for our community and for a better world are more connected than they are separate. And we need to stand together to fight these corporate interest groups that have control over our institutions.
I grew up walking to school, and I would smell a really stinky odor, and I didn't know what it was. I actually thought it was normal, that once I crossed Conant, my job was to cover my nose until I got to my middle school. I then found out that this was the Detroit incinerator that was burning Canadian garbage to create clean energy in the form of steam. This is the conversation that must start as we talk about what a just transition looks like. Because it's always the communities that are a little bit more black, a little bit more brown, a little bit more poor than the rest of the state that are suffering from the hyper concentration around the pollution in our state. And as climates will continue to get hotter, those communities will have more impacts around things like asthma and cancer, skin disease, and things of that nature. So, a couple things that I'm working on in the legislature, POCA, the Protecting Overburdened Communities Act, which would factor in as the state of Michigan starts issuing permits to actually consider the overall public health impact. That, yes, technically we can set up a factory here that emits sulfur dioxide, and a factory here that emits CO2, and a factory here that emits methane gas, and we could all get to the very top of our threshold and also calculate some fines that we'll pay in our profit model. And then all of a sudden, you have communities that are literally breathing what the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles wouldn't even accept, right? So the first conversation has to be, how do we make sure that the communities that are already suffering in hellholes are not going to continue to suffer as the planet gets hotter? That's the first point. The second point is we got to shift the conversation away from the consumer and back to the producer. Because a lot of what we do here in this country is we try to tell folks under the guise of recycling that this is what's going to fix the issue. But the reality is, the problem is how we produce things, not how we consume things. So I have another bill that would address extended producer responsibility, that your job is not to simply get the product shipped to my house in a nice box wrapped in plastic, wrapped in more plastic, covered around in styrofoam, but your job is to make sure that before you get it to my house, you are considering the environmental impacts of sending it to my house and what happens once I open up that box and the plastic and remove the styrofoam. So that's the second part that we have to have a discussion on. And I think the third part is we know that there's going to be a huge opportunity for folks to innovate and for folks to take in some of these dollars to do good work. And at the same time, they're going to make some money. But to Dylan's point, we got to make sure that workers are protected and that communities are giving a real space to do this work in their own backyards. So we don't allow 100 megawatt facilities to open up solar panels, and we forego the community solar projects between 5 and 10 megawatts. We also invest in those places. We allow communities like Highland Park, right next to my hometown, to invest in their own community solar so that they're not waiting for DTE just to simply have the streetlights on. So those are three tangible ways that I think we can start the just transition. But overarching all of that is we have to start penalizing people because we need revenue, folks. You can't do this work without the money. So punish the bad actors and make them pay. You know, when I talked to Rashida the very first time I got into politics, she taught me something that I thought was fascinating. These companies factor in the fines and the violations in their annual operating budget. So they factor that in when they assess what their profits and revenue is going to look like. So we need to make sure that those penalties actually sting so that they can actually change their behavior. So that is going to be, I think, the bedrock of how we approach this issue in order to start bringing in some of those dollars to actually implement some of these programs.
Thank you, Representative. And to your point, if a crime is punishable by a fine, then it is legal for the rich. I want to turn to our audience questions, and unfortunately, I will not have the chance to answer all of them. You may see on your schedule, we're scheduled to end here at 10:50, but we're going to go towards 11. We're running a little bit behind. Our first question is related to legislation that we brought up earlier in the Senate. How much power does the Michigan Public Service Commission have? DTE is problematic and local folks are feeling hopeless about advocacy. What can they do to hold them accountable?
Yeah, I think the MPSC, the MPSC has as much power as the legislature gives it, and as much power as the courage of the people who sit on it. And so it's important to look at who's on the MPSC And there is an appointment being made now, so you might take a look at that. But as a county commissioner, we advocated for lower costs for our residents because we knew people were struggling. And we were struggling to get DTE to work with us in a way that was constructive. And we were able to advocate in front of the MPSC to get them to get DTE to move. So I think that is an option. But the other thing you have to look at, because again, the MPSC has as much power as the legislature gives it, and we can also give it guardrails and constraints, right? Because they have to follow them. It has as much power as the courage of the legislature. And if you want to look around and see how much money DT spends in politics, I don't know exactly what it is, but I know that it's a lot. And that that kind of support from a large corporation can influence the way people think about it. And I don't take a dime from DTE. I work with them. I sit down to coffee with them, talk to them. I pay for my own coffee.
Thank you, Senator. Related to that, there have been several questions asked by the audience about the role of money in politics and how it may prevent this legislation from becoming reality. How do we defeat the role of vested interests, oil and gas interests, in our politics and overcome them?
So, just to echo what Senator Shink brought up, the top 3 spenders in Lansing are Blue Cross Blue Shield, Consumers Energy, and DTE Energy. They spend tens of $millions each every single election cycle, most of it through channels called social welfare organizations, 501c4s or 527s. And then they'll tell you that their PAC is funded by the hardworking men and women of the company who voluntarily give up a small part of their paycheck every single week or pay period in order to support the efforts of the utilities. And I had this conversation actually, I met with some of the executives of the utility companies, and I said, you know, I'm happy to debate fiercely on the merits of the issue, and you probably know more than me on the science and the technology behind utility management and actually getting people power. But let's level set the conversation that before we walk into a room, you haven't paid off a lot of my colleagues to then stay silent. And anybody that tells you money doesn't influence is full of crap. I'll give you just a tangible example. I buy you lunch every single day for the rest of your life. And I come in and I say, hey, could you do me a favor? And you don't like the favor. But you know that your lunch budget is $0 because I'm covering it every single day. Are you really going to tell me you're not going to consider doing the favor I asked you to do? Now, translate that to the tune of $1,000 checks, $10,000 checks, $20,000 checks, or in some instances, backpacks that they give so we can show our constituents that we're doing the work of the people. So one of the things I'm working on with Attorney General Nessel right now is looking at ways to set up guardrails or at least expose transparency in how much these utility companies are spending in the process. As a regulated monopoly, and if you look at the state of New Jersey, they do this with their gambling industry. So the gambling industry has very, very strict guardrails on how they can give, what they can give, and who they can give to in the state legislature and in state government. So we're looking at ways right now. I know Colorado passed legislation that would prohibit utility companies from giving PAC contributions from ratepayer profits. And while that could be an avenue that we take, what I've also learned is that DTE and consumers are extremely good at finding ways to just shift money around and saying, oh, this is not coming from the ratepayers. This is coming from our executives. Well, they just got a $500,000 bonus, right? So all of a sudden they're massive contributors to their PAC. So there's ways that they can try to circumvent this. So we're really trying to figure out what are the legal ways that will be protected in courts, because we will get sued once we introduce this legislation and hopefully pass it. And can we make sure that it has enough teeth that it's actually going to impact it? But I think the first step in this whole process in order to continue to win the court of public opinion is to show everybody that, hey, you're a regulated monopoly by the state of Michigan. You must show us how much you are spending and where you are spending it, even if we can't stop you from spending it for now.
This is a hugely important issue, so I need to add one more thing to it. I actually tried to run with this as one of my campaign promises, and I couldn't really get people interested in the idea that this was important. And I don't know if it's a little too complicated for people just knocking on the door saying, hey, what do you think? Don't you think we should get money out of politics? And they're like, yeah, I'm worried about clean water. That's good. So right now, voters, not politicians, and you all remember them because they're the ones who made it possible for the new sheriff in town, right? Voters, not politicians. This is their new project. So they are working. We're working on a piece of legislation that's supplemental to what they're doing in the House also, by the way, to open up or close some opportunities through the dark PACs, some things that we can do for Michigan. I don't take any corporate money either, by the way. We're just going to do it this way, right, with you guys. But if you have time and can work with voters, not politicians, over the next couple of years, we could actually change the law in Michigan about how we do elections. So we just need help.
Thank you all. We're finishing up now. Throughout today's discussion, we have learned about the progress Michigan is making in addressing the climate crisis, but for those of us engaged in this movement, it often feels like the progress is minimal in the grand scheme of something like climate change. It has led to depression, burnout, and a lot of people leaving this movement. So I want to close our discussion here, hearing from each of you what gives you hope that we can fight climate change and that there is a future worth fighting for.
What gives me hope is that together we have elected a Democratic trifecta for the first time in 40 years, and it is making a difference. Well, I want to add a little more. Climate change is being discussed in the Senate on a daily basis, and we're working on it. And there are more things that we didn't even talk about, right? So one of the big things I'm working on is how to preserve 10% more of Michigan's land space for the people of this state to enjoy and to fight climate change at the same time. And to protect the special places in their communities, which I'm calling Protect My Special Places. And I think you're going to see a lot. We've only been in power for 5 months, and we've done a huge amount of work, and we're not going to stop. And Rosemary and I are not the only people who are working on it in the Senate. It's an important goal. We have the support of leadership, and we are going to get this work done. And we will need your support. Write us, call us, write the governor, call the governor. Don't stop pushing, because this is the moment where we are going to make some real changes.
And that's, a lot of why I am so hopeful for the future. What we see for our committees, those committees that we share, are the largest committees in the Senate. Everyone wants to be working on this in this space. And we hear it in the news all the time now. A couple of years ago, we didn't hear it in the news. All the time. We're seeing it more and more. There's more and more motivation. There's more and more. We're starting to get some momentum going. I think I'm most hopeful because I walked in the room and saw so many people in here. This is why we have hope, because so many of us are focused on how are we going to save our planet? How are we going to save our people? How are we going to work together to get this done? And we actually are making progress. So thank you.
All right, well, I think I might offer a slightly different perspective here. I am hopeful, but I'm cautiously hopeful. And I will say this because of the history of our country, the history of the last 40 years, the most recent history of our own president deciding to open the Willow Project in Alaska. We cannot get complacent. Just because there's a Democratic trifecta doesn't mean anything. I say this because the Senate, you guys are doing some really great work. So I don't want to like say that there's not good work and good people advocating, but the reality is in the House, we have 56 to 54. We know we're not going to get a single Republican vote for most or any of this. We need pressure on everybody in office from the bottom to make this change actually happen. If you just rely on elected officials to do this for you, it's not going to happen. We need you to push us and force us to do this.
You know, I always say Dylan tends to bring a dark cloud every time I see him. So I want to bring some solar energy back for a second. He's not wrong about the pressure. And I will say that it is true, we are the only trifecta, Democratic trifecta in the country that has yet to act on climate. But, and that is a legitimate question, right? I'm not gonna dodge that. The conversation, I think, is valid. But this idea that there's not a difference, that Democrats are in control, I think is wrong, and I'll tell you why. I worked with the Republicans for 2.5 years, and Rosemary worked with them for 4. They don't give a rat's behind about the planet, even some of the ones that you can actually ration with. They are drill, baby, drill, till the planet burns in hell. So I want you all to understand something. The difference between the Republicans and the Democrat is that Democrats can and will respond to pressure. Now, it would be ideal if we acted at our own volition and did the right thing all the time. But I would be lying to you if I did not tell you that the influence in Lansing is still not flipped. We may have flipped the House and the Senate, but the institutions that surround the Capitol were built over 50 years. And unfortunately, we cannot elect our way out of those institutions. I just want to be honest with you all. Every single lobbyist didn't, lose an election. They've been there for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Some of them look like walking, they look like they've been embalmed. and my point is that while, yes, I always say government moves like honey, but it's not as sweet. It can be very slow. It's because we have these tides that are working against us. But know that the pressure you guys put works. And Democrats are also a little nervous because we only have a 1-vote majority in the House and 1-vote majority in the Senate. So we're going to act when our partners and our base tells us if you don't do the right thing, we're going to just cross our arms and you guys are going to see what happens if you don't keep the power. So that's the leverage that you all have in this room, right? Keep the pressure on us, keep the heat on us, and we will do the right thing. I could not tell you that's the case with the Republicans. And I want to answer Hudson's question. Most politicians dodge questions, but I actually want to answer this one. He said, what keeps you going? Can anybody with white hair please stand up? I had to find the politically correct way to say it. No, I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. Every single one of these people haven't given up, right? Think about what they've seen and how much cynicism that they had to endure when Exxon and BP and even locally places like DuPont Chemical in Ohio, what they've done to communities, decimated and killed people and crops and animals and destroyed the planet, but they are still fighting. So anytime I get frustrated and I think about the folks that persisted in light and in spite of all the things that our seasoned citizens have seen. So I'm not going to give up if they haven't given up. And I know Gen Z, y'all are just firecrackers, and it's great. But yes, things like the Willow Project may be disappointing. Yes, this current default negotiation where they did a carve-out on deregulating one specific project is also a problem. 100%, I'm with you. It's frustrating as hell, but recognize that these were 80-year projects in development in terms of building that power. We are not going to break it down overnight. But if we stop, they will continue building, and we will continue losing.
One final round of applause for our panelists. Thank you for joining us today.